Korean Mafia Boss's 8-year-old daughter gave black nurse her dead mother's ring. Then security footage revealed why. An 8-year-old girl just slipped a dead woman's diamond ring onto a stranger's finger. And the man watching the security footage right now, the most feared crime boss in Seoul, is not calling the police. He is not calling his lawyers. He is sitting completely still in a darkened surveillance room, rewinding the footage over and over. Because what he is watching is not a theft. It is something he has no word for. Something that is breaking him open from the inside. His name is Jang Hyun-woo, and the last time his daughter chose someone the way she just chose this nurse, it was her mother. Her mother who is dead. Her mother whose ring just left his daughter's hand and landed on a stranger's finger in the pediatric ward of Seoul General Hospital. That ring was never supposed to leave the family. That ring was buried with meaning, and yet here it is, glittering under fluorescent hospital lights on the hand of a woman his daughter has known for exactly 40 minutes. He leans forward. He presses play again. 3 days before any of this happened, Jang Hyun-woo sat at the head of a conference table on the 42nd floor of a glass building in Gangnam and listened to 4 men argue about territory. He said nothing for 11 minutes. Then he spoke 2 sentences. The 4 men went quiet. The matter was settled. That is who Jang Hyun-woo is. A man who does not need volume to fill a room, whose silence weighs more than most men's threats, whose stillness is the most dangerous thing about him. He is 39 years old. He has a jaw that looks carved rather than grown, dark eyes that process everything and reveal nothing, and hands that have done things he will not think about in daylight. He runs the Jang organization, which is what polite people call it, a network of construction fronts, shipping logistics, private security firms, and underground arrangements that stretch from Busan to Incheon and have tentacles in 3 countries. Interpol has a file on him that is 400 pages long and has never produced a single charge. Not because the file is empty, because the file is never enough. People who don't know him see the suit first, then the stillness, then they feel the stillness. And by then, they are already adjusting themselves to the presence of someone who does not adjust himself to anything. People who do know him know that the stillness is not composure in the ordinary sense. It is calculation. It is the expression of a man whose brain is running 3 scenarios ahead of the current conversation at all times, who never speaks before the optimal moment, who has never once in his adult life said more than was necessary. He is not cruel. He has simply long understood that power is largely a matter of economy. The less you spend, the more you have. He is also a father. That is the part that does not fit with anything else. The part that his enemies do not understand and his associates pretend does not exist. Because Jang Hyun-woo, who has faced down rival bosses and corrupt prosecutors and once sat in an interrogation room for 9 hours without blinking, becomes a different creature entirely when his daughter looks at him. Not a soft creature. Softness is not the word. Something more helpless than soft. Something that has no name in the vocabulary he's built his life around. Her name is Jia. She is 8 years old. She has her mother's eyes, large, dark, slightly tilted at the corners, the kind of eyes that see through things rather than at them. She is small for her age, quiet in the way that is not shyness, but rather deep internal processing. The kind of child who watches everything before she speaks and who, when she does speak, tends to say exactly the thing that nobody was prepared to hear. She has been like this since she was 3. Soo-yeon used to say that Jia came into the world already knowing something, that she was the only 8-year-old she'd ever met who made adults feel like they were the ones being evaluated. Jia has not been well since her mother died. That was 14 months ago. Park Soo-yeon, his wife, Jia's mother, was killed in what the official report called a targeted attack. A rival faction, a message. Jang Hyun-woo received that message, and he sent one back that took 11 days to compose and 6 weeks to deliver in full, and the men responsible no longer exist in any form that could be discussed in polite company. He had not felt satisfaction afterward. He had not expected to. Vengeance has a logic that is separate from grief, and getting one does nothing to the other. He had known this intellectually before it happened. Afterward, he knew it the way you know things that have landed in your body, the kind of knowing that never leaves. None of it brought Soo-yeon back. None of it touched the place inside Jia where her mother used to live. The child grief counselors called it complex childhood grief with elements of trauma-based withdrawal. What it looked like in practice was this. Jia stopped drawing. She used to draw constantly. Animals, cityscapes, elaborate fantasy maps with tiny labeled territories. Strange hybrid creatures she invented with Latin-adjacent names she made up herself. She stopped the day her mother died, and had not picked up a pencil for any purpose beyond schoolwork since. She stopped laughing freely. She still smiled sometimes, a small, careful smile, but the laugh, the real one, the one that had come from deep in her chest and sounded like her mother's laugh but younger, more chaotic, the laugh that could fill a room and make strangers on the street turn and grin without knowing why. That was gone. She moved through the world as though she was conserving something essential, as though joy was a resource she could not afford to spend, and spending it on the wrong thing might mean running out. She was also getting headaches, persistent ones that had started 2 months ago, clustered behind her right eye, worse in the evenings when the day had tired her and her guard was lower. The family doctor referred them to a neurologist at Seoul General. Routine examination, almost certainly tension-related, but with children you do not take chances. Jang Hyun-woo personally reviewed the neurologist's credentials before scheduling the appointment. He read the man's published papers. He had his people run a background check that would have embarrassed a small intelligence agency. He had 3 of his men positioned in the hospital on the day of the visit. 1 in the lobby, 1 in the parking structure, 1 on the pediatric floor dressed as a visitor. He sat beside Jia in the waiting room of the pediatric ward in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, looking exactly like what he was. A man who was out of his depth in a way that no amount of power could fix. Jia sat next to him with her hands folded in her lap, wearing a yellow cardigan and white sneakers, looking at everything with those dark, attentive eyes. The pediatric ward was cheerful in the way that children's hospital spaces try to be cheerful. Murals of cartoon animals on the walls, colored plastic chairs, a small play corner with foam blocks and picture books. There were other children in the waiting room, a toddler asleep across his mother's lap, a boy of about 10 playing a game on a phone, a girl with a bandaged wrist reading a book with a cat on the cover. Jia looked at each of them briefly, cataloging. Then she looked at the murals the way she looked at most things now. Observing, not feeling. Processing the surface without letting the surface all the way in. That was when the nurse came in. Her name is Adaeze Naji. She is 31 years old, Nigerian-born, Seoul-trained, and she has been working the pediatric ward at Seoul General for 4 years. She is tall, nearly 5'9", with close-cropped natural hair and dark skin that always looks luminous under the ward's harsh overhead lights, which should be impossible but somehow isn't. She moves with an efficiency that never becomes brisk, the particular economy of motion that belongs to people who have been competent for so long that it has become effortless. She is precise with medications, excellent with needles, remarkable with paperwork, and every one of those things is secondary to the thing that actually makes her extraordinary in this ward. She sees children. Not in the basic clinical sense. Anyone with working eyes can see a child. What Adaeze does is more specific. She looks at children the way a translator looks at a text, finding the meaning beneath the surface, reading the thing that is not being said because the child doesn't have the words for it or doesn't trust that the words will be received. She had learned this, she once told a colleague, because she had been a child in a house where adults were always very busy, and she had spent a lot of time feeling things that no one asked her about. And she had decided somewhere around age 7 that when she was a grown-up, she would be the kind of grown-up who asked. She had been asking ever since. She had also been, for 4 years, walking into a foreign country's hospital system and doing excellent work and being well-liked and going home to a small apartment in Mapogu and calling her mother in Lagos on Sundays and maintaining the orderly, purposeful life of someone who has decided what they are for and is getting on with it. She did not describe herself as lonely. She described herself as settled. These were not always the same thing, but she had made her peace with the distance between them. She was not Jia's assigned nurse. She was walking through the waiting room on her way to the supply station when she noticed the child in the yellow cardigan sitting next to a very large, very still man. And she noticed the way the child's fingers were working quietly in her lap. A small, private motion, like she was trying to knot something invisible. A motion that Adaeze recognized as the physical expression of someone containing something large that has nowhere to go. And Adaeze Naji stopped. She crouched down to Jia's level, which put her at roughly the same height as the girl, and she said, in Korean that carried a warm accent she'd never lost, "I like your cardigan. Yellow is a brave color." Jia looked at her. Not the polite dart and glance that children do with strangers. A real look. The kind of look she used to give things that interested her. "Why is it brave?" Jia asked. "Because it says, 'Here I am.' Some colors hide. Yellow doesn't hide." The man beside Jia, and Adaeze was very much aware of him, aware of the particular quality of attention he radiated, like a sensor array disguised as a person, said nothing. He watched. Jia considered what Adaeze had said with the seriousness she gave to all things. Then she said, "My mom wore yellow a lot." Adaeze did not say, "I'm sorry for your loss," which is what most adults say because it fills space and requires nothing. She said, "She sounds like someone who wasn't afraid of being seen." Something moved across Jia's face, small and fast, like a fish turning under deep water. She wasn't afraid of anything, Jia said. I believe it, Adeze said. You look like her. Jia stared at her. You don't know what she looked like. No, Adeze agreed. But I can see you. And you don't look afraid of anything either. That was the moment. Jang Hyun-woo would later identify it, re-watching the footage from the waiting room camera, as the exact frame in which something shifted in his daughter's face. Not the small, careful smile, but something rawer, something that lived underneath the smile. And he would sit with that image for a long time, thinking about what it means when a stranger can reach a child that her own father has been trying to reach for 14 months. The neurology appointment went smoothly. Tension headaches, as expected. Mild intervention recommended. Better sleep hygiene, reduced screen time, and a follow-up in 6 weeks. Jang Hyun-woo sat through the consultation, taking mental notes the way he took notes in every high-stakes meeting, parsing information, assessing reliability, calculating next steps. Jia sat quietly and answered the neurologist's questions in full sentences. On the way back through the pediatric ward, Jia stopped walking. Her father took 2 more steps before he realized she wasn't beside him. He turned. She was standing in the corridor, looking through the open doorway of a patient room, where Adeze Anaji was changing the bandage on a small boy's arm, talking to him steadily while she worked. Not about the bandage, not about being brave, but about a story. Something about a tortoise who wanted to learn to fly, told in Korean with that warm accented texture. And the boy was listening with his whole body, the way children listen to things that are reaching them. Jia watched this for nearly a minute. Jang Hyun-woo watched Jia. Then Adeze looked up and saw the girl in the doorway and smiled. Not the professional smile, not the reassuring nurse smile, but a real one, the kind that reaches the outer corners of the eyes. She finished the bandage, said something quiet to the boy, and came to the doorway. Did you get good news? She asked Jia. Just headaches, Jia said. Not scary ones. Good. Headaches you can work with. She looked at Jang Hyun-woo briefly, a calm, assessing look that contained neither intimidation nor performance, and then back at Jia. Are you heading home? Yes, Jia said, and then, after a pause, do you work here every day? Most days, Tuesday through Saturday. Jia nodded as though filing this information carefully. They said goodbye. Jang Hyun-woo put his hand lightly on his daughter's shoulder and walked her toward the elevator. In the elevator, Jia was quiet for a moment, and then she said, She smells like the soap Mama used to buy. Jang Hyun-woo went very still inside. Does she? The green one, from the market near Ihwa. Jia paused. Daddy, can we come back on Thursday? He looked down at her. Her face was turned up toward him, open in a way it hadn't been in months, and something in his chest performed a complicated maneuver he was not equipped to name. Your appointment is in 6 weeks, he said. I know, Jia said. I didn't mean for an appointment. He said he would think about it. He thought about it for approximately 30 seconds after the elevator doors opened. Then he told his assistant to clear his Thursday afternoon. Thursday arrived and he brought Jia back to Seoul General under the pretext of nothing, They simply walked in, and Jia navigated the pediatric ward with the quiet purposefulness of someone who knew where they were going. She found Adeze at the nurse's station writing notes. Adeze looked up and looked genuinely pleased, not in a performed way, but in the way of someone who has thought about a person since they last saw them. "Yellow cardigan girl," she said. "I have a name," Jia said, but she was almost smiling. "What is it?" "Jia." Jia. Adeze said it the right way, with the right weight on the right syllable. "I'm Adeze. Most people here call me Nurse Ada." "Which do you prefer?" Adeze looked at her with something that might have been delight. "Adeze." "Then that's what I'll call you." Zhang Qianyu stood back and watched his daughter have a conversation with this woman, a real conversation, back and forth and present, the kind his daughter had not had with anyone outside of school formality since her mother died. He felt something he could not afford to examine right then, so he filed it and watched. They stayed for 40 minutes. Adeze was working. She had patients, rounds, tasks, but she kept circling back to Jia, who had settled herself on a chair near the nurse's station with the comfort of a child who felt safe. They talked about the hospital murals. They talked about whether tortoises actually dream. They talked, briefly and without ceremony, about Jia's mother. Adeze asked one simple question, and Jia answered it, and Adeze listened without flinching or redirecting, which is rarer than it sounds, and which Jia clearly felt because she kept talking. Small, careful pieces offered and received. Zhang Qianyu, standing 6 feet away, was doing the thing he did in difficult situations, which was maintaining absolute external stillness while his interior was under considerable turbulence. And then the visit was ending. Adeze walked them to the corridor, crouched down to Jia's level again for the goodbye, and Jia looked at her for a long moment, that same deep looking. And then she reached into the collar of her cardigan. She wore it on a thin chain. She had insisted on wearing it on a chain after her mother died, would not be separated from it, had refused every gentle suggestion that it should be kept somewhere safe. It was a diamond solitaire ring, simple setting, platinum band, not large but very fine. The ring Zhang Qianyu had placed on Park Suyun's finger in a ceremony 14 years ago, which had been placed back into his hands after she died, and which he had given to Jia because she had asked for it, and he did not know how to say no to his grieving daughter. Jia unclasped the chain, slid the ring off, and held it out to Adeze. Adeze looked at the ring. She looked at Jia. "Jia, it will keep you safe," Jia said with a conviction so quiet and absolute that it stopped everything. "Sweetheart, I can't. You need it more," Jia said. She would want you to have it. Something crossed Adeze's face. Confusion, not offense, but real confusion. The look of someone trying to understand the logic of something that doesn't have logic, and also something else, something gentler. Because this child was offering her the most precious thing she owned, with complete sincerity, and for reasons Adeze could not fathom. She started to say she couldn't accept it, but Jia reached forward, took Adeze's right hand, and placed the ring on her finger with the precise deliberateness of someone performing a ritual they have thought about carefully. Then she stepped back. "Jia," Zhang Qianyu said, and his voice came out differently than he intended, rougher at the edges. But Jia turned and walked quickly to the elevator, and by the time her father reached her, the elevator was opening, and she stepped inside. And she did not cry, but her jaw was set in a way that meant she was working very hard at something internal. And he stood beside her in the elevator in silence because he didn't know what to say, and he had never been a man who spoke when he didn't know what to say. Behind them, in the corridor, Adeze Naji stood looking at the ring on her finger with an expression that nobody was recording. Open, bewildered, moved in a way she couldn't yet name. He called his head of security from the car. "I need the surveillance footage from the pediatric ward at Seoul General," he said. "Today. The corridor near the nurses' station and the waiting room. All of it. Tuesday and Thursday." His head of security did not ask why. He did not ask anything. That is why he had the job he had. Within 2 hours, Jang Han-woo had a full copy of the footage in his private office on a secure drive. He sat down in front of 3 screens in the dark. He told his assistant to hold everything. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and did not touch it. He told himself he was doing this because the ring was a significant piece of jewelry with sentimental and financial value, and it had been transferred to a stranger in an uncontrolled environment, and he needed to understand the circumstances before deciding how to proceed. This is what he told himself. He believed approximately 40% of it. The other 60% he didn't examine. He started with the first visit, the waiting room footage from Tuesday. He watched himself and Jia enter. He watched Adeze Naji stop walking and crouch down. He watched his daughter's face go from closed to something else. Not open, not exactly, but less sealed. A fraction of pressure released, like a jar lid turned a quarter turn. He watched the whole exchange, which lasted less than 4 minutes, and he watched it again, and then a third time. Something in the way Adeze moved, unhurried, deliberate, fully present, the way very few people are fully present when they are at work, kept pulling him back. He had spent his adult life reading people. He could not find the performance in her. He moved forward to Thursday. He watched Jia find the nurses' station with that quiet purposefulness, navigating the ward like someone following a signal rather than looking for a sign. He watched 40 minutes of his daughter being present in a way she had not been present in over a year. He watched her hands move when she talked, the way Soo-yeon's hands had moved. He watched Jia laugh, the real laugh, the one that lived in his wife's chest and had somehow migrated to his daughter's, coming out of her throat for the first time in 14 months in response to something about a tortoise and an umbrella. He watched that laugh 4 times. On the 4th viewing, he stopped the footage and sat for a moment, doing nothing at all. Then he watched the ring exchange. He watched Jia remove the chain from her neck with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been thinking about this for a specific amount of time and had arrived at a decision. He watched Adeze's face cycle through confusion and tenderness, and the particular expression of someone trying to do the right thing while being completely ambushed by the emotional weight of a moment they were not prepared for. He watched Jia place the ring on Adeze's finger with the gravity and precision of a ceremony. Not impulsive, not accidental, performed with the seriousness of a child who has decided something with her whole self and will not be redirected. He watched his daughter walk away quickly, which is Jia's tell, the thing she does when she has done something irreversible that she has thought about long enough and does not want to second guess now that it's done. He paused the footage on Adeze standing in the corridor, alone, looking at the ring on her hand with an expression that no one was meant to see. Open, unguarded, moved in a way she had not had time to contain. He sat with that image. Then he pulled up his intelligence database and ran a full background check on Adeze Naji. He expected nothing remarkable. He expected work history, visa records, a residential address, the ordinary documentary skeleton of an ordinary life. What he found instead took the air out of the room. Adeze Naji, born Lagos, Nigeria, undergraduate degree in biology from the University of Cincinnati, Ohio. Enrolled 9 years ago, graduated with honors. Then graduate nursing in Seoul, the University of Cincinnati. Jang Hyun-woo's hands stopped moving. Park Soo-yeon had studied at the University of Cincinnati for a graduate exchange program in environmental science. 1 year. She had gone because a professor she admired had a research partnership there, and she had come back changed, in the small ways foreign places change you. Lighter, in some way, he had noticed even before he knew her well, carrying new recipes and new music, and the warmth of someone who had been genuinely seen by people in another country. Their years at that university overlapped by 2 years. He cross-referenced. Then he cross-referenced again, because he needed to be certain before he let this information rearrange anything inside him. It took 11 minutes and 2 phone calls to people who would rather not receive calls from him. Park Soo-yeon and Adeze Naji were not classmates who nodded in hallways. They were friends. Documented friends. A student environmental club they had joined the same semester, a co-authored research paper on watershed contamination in rural Ohio, published in an undergraduate journal during Soo-yeon's exchange year. And a photograph. Small, slightly grainy, printed in a university publication. 2 young women standing in front of a lake on an autumn day, both squinting into the sun, both laughing at something off camera. Soo-yeon on the left, looking like Jia, the way Jia looked like her. Same tilt of the head, same quality of delight. Adeze on the right, tall and luminous even in newsprint, head thrown back, completely unguarded. Best friends. His dead wife had been best friends with this nurse. He sat absolutely still in the dark room for a very long time. Then he thought about the soap, the green soap. Jia had said in the elevator, "She smells like the soap Mama used to buy." A specific botanical soap from a small specialty market near Ewha University, the kind you only discover if someone points you to it. The kind you send to a friend overseas in a care package because you want them to smell something from your life. Soo-yeon had discovered it and loved it and sent 3 bars to a friend in Ohio. The friend had used them and kept buying the brand when she moved to Seoul years later. Not as a deliberate act of remembrance, but as the act of someone who has absorbed another person's preferences so completely that the preference becomes their own. The way certain things persist. The way the dead continue to arrange the world from the places they can no longer be seen. He thought about Jia in the corridor doorway, watching Adeze with the small bandaged boy. Not the way a child watches something interesting. The way a child watches something that reaches them. He had thought Jia chose this woman because she was warm and skilled with children. That was true, but that was not the whole truth. Jia had smelled her mother in a hospital corridor and turned and found a woman she had never seen before and moved toward the warmth of it, the way anything that has been very cold for a very long time moves toward anything that resembles the heat it used to know. She didn't know consciously. She had no information. But something in her, some instrument in her that was finely tuned to the frequency of her mother, had located a resonance, and she had followed it across a waiting room and given it the most precious thing she owned. The ring wasn't random. It had gone exactly where it needed to go. It had simply taken a grief-stricken 8-year-old operating entirely on instinct to understand what a grown adult running databases and cross-referencing intelligence files had needed 2 hours to confirm. He exhaled slowly. He reached for the whiskey he had poured and not touched. He drank half of it. Then he sat in the dark and thought about what comes next. He found Adaize Naji in the hospital the next morning before her shift started. He did not send anyone ahead. He did not announce himself. He walked into the hospital in a dark coat, alone. The 3 men who had accompanied him on Jia's appointment were downstairs, giving clear instructions to stay there, and he asked the reception to page Nurse Adaize Naji. She came into the small meeting room they directed him to and stopped when she saw who was waiting. She had clearly been preparing to return the ring. It was not on her hand. It was in a small hospital envelope she was carrying. Her expression was professional and steady, no visible fear, but a kind of heightened alertness, the look of someone in the presence of a force they are calibrating. He stood when she entered. He had thought carefully about what to say and had prepared several openings and had discarded all of them because none of them were true enough. What he said was, "My daughter was right. My wife would have wanted you to have it." Adaize went very still. He set a photograph on the table between them, the one from the university publication, Soo-yun and Adaize, the autumn lake, both of them laughing. He had printed it that morning. Adaize looked at the photograph. Her expression changed in a way he did not look away from, because he was a man who had trained himself to read faces, and this face was telling him something true. The recognition, and below the recognition, something vast and unprocessed, the face of someone confronting a grief they have been carrying in sealed compartments, suddenly broken open. "Soo-yun," she said. It came out very quietly. "Yes." "She was your wife." "Yes." Adaize put her hand over her mouth, not performing anything, actually trying to hold something in. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "I didn't know she was here," Adaize said finally. "We lost touch after I came to Seoul. I looked for her online a few times, but she wasn't on social media and She stopped. "When did she—" 14 months ago. Adaize closed her eyes. The envelope with the ring was still in her hand. She set it down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed. He recognized this. This is what controlled people do when something gets through the control. When the scaffolding shakes and they have to press their hands against a solid surface to remember that surfaces are solid. "She talked about you," he said. It was something he had not planned to say, but it was true, and it seemed important that she know it. "Not in the last years. She didn't know where you were. But early in our marriage, she talked about her time in Cincinnati, about a friend who taught her how to make jollof rice in a dormitory kitchen, about going to concerts they couldn't afford and standing in the back, about a friend who was going to change the world and wouldn't let anyone tell her otherwise. Adeze made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite crying. Something in between. "She called you brilliant," he said. "She said you were the most competent person she'd ever met, and that hospitals should be grateful to have you. She said..." He paused, retrieving the memory with care. "She said you had a gift for finding the scared thing inside someone and making it feel less scared. That was the exact phrase she used." Adeze looked at him. She was blinking quickly, which is what people do when they are preventing tears without wanting to be caught preventing them. "Gia found me on purpose," she said. It was not a question. "She didn't know she was finding you," he said. "She found something familiar. She found the shape of someone her mother loved, even though she had no way of knowing what that shape was. She felt it." He paused. "My daughter doesn't choose people carelessly. She hasn't chosen anyone in 14 months. And she chose you within 4 minutes of meeting you, before she knew your name." "The soap," Adeze said softly. "Yes. I've used it since Suyan sent it to me," she said. "Years ago. I found it here when I moved to Seoul, and I kept using it because it was nice. I didn't think..." She stopped. "She sent me 3 bars, and I've been buying it ever since." He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them, on the table, was a photograph of 2 young women laughing at a lake on an autumn day, neither of them yet knowing what their lives would become. And the envelope, with a diamond ring inside it, that had been on his wife's finger for 11 years, and on his daughter's neck for 14 months, and on this woman's hand for less than a day. "I would like you to keep the ring," he said. "I can't." "It is not a request made out of sentimentality," he said, which was not entirely true, but was easier to say. "Gia gave it to you because she wanted to. She had reasons she couldn't articulate. Now I know those reasons. They are good ones." He paused. "My wife would have given it to you herself if she had known you were here." Adeze looked at the envelope for a long time. "I have a condition," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Gia can come back," she said. "Not as a patient, not with an appointment, just she can come when she wants to and talk, or sit, or whatever she needs." She met his eyes directly, without calculation, which was unusual. Most people who looked him in the eyes were trying to project something. She was simply looking. "She's grieving, and she found something that helps. That should be allowed to continue." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." "I wanted to be clear that I'm not..." she started. "I understand what you're offering and what you aren't," he said. "You don't need to protect your intentions to me. I can see what kind of person you are." She studied him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Then she picked up the envelope and opened it and slid the ring onto her right hand, and it sat there on her finger the way it had sat in that corridor, slightly unreal, like an object that has arrived from a different story and is trying to make sense of this one. "She used to do this," Adeze said quietly, almost to herself, looking at the ring. "Give things away. The right things to the right people. She always knew." She looked up. "Your daughter is exactly like her." Something happened in Jang Hinu's chest that he was not going to examine in this room, in this moment, with this woman he did not know yet. But he felt it, the way you feel a shift in pressure before weather changes, something rearranging. "Yes," he said. "She is." 6 weeks later, Jia went back to Seoul General for her scheduled follow-up. The headaches had largely resolved, better sleep as recommended, and whatever internal thing had been compressing her had released some pressure, the neurologist noted. Her face had more color. She had started drawing again. Not every day, but sometimes. Small things. A tortoise, a lake, 2 figures standing in autumn light. She and Adeze sat together in the small family consultation room that Adeze had quietly claimed for their visits, and they talked about the tortoise story, which had evolved over 6 weeks into something with several chapters and a secondary character named after a cloud. Jia had opinions about plot structure. Adeze had opinions about whether tortoises were capable of friendship or merely proximity tolerance. They argued this point with great seriousness and obvious enjoyment. Jang Hyun-woo sat outside the room in the corridor. His 3 men were downstairs. He had a clear view through the door's small window, not because he was watching out of suspicion, but because he couldn't stop looking. His daughter's hands were moving when she talked, animated, gestural, the way Soo-yeon's hands had moved. Adeze said something. Jia threw her head back and laughed, the real laugh, the one that had been gone for 14 months. It came out of the room through the small gap in the door and hit Jang Hyun-woo somewhere below the sternum, and he pressed his back against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling, because a man in his position cannot be seen in certain states, not in hospital corridors, not anywhere. He stayed like that for a moment, just a moment. Then he composed himself. He straightened his coat. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the wall across the corridor, at the mural painted there. Cartoon animals, a giraffe, an elephant, a small bright-eyed tortoise craning its neck toward a sky full of clouds. He thought about a photograph of 2 women at a lake on an autumn day. He thought about the particular architecture of grief, which is not a room you leave, but a country you learn to live in, which has its own roads and its own weather, and which sometimes, if you are not expecting it, leads you somewhere that looks like the past, but is actually, improbably, the future. He thought about his daughter, on the other side of that door, laughing. He stood in the corridor of a children's hospital, and he waited, and the waiting felt different than it usually felt. Less like containing something and more like making room for something. And through the small window, his daughter's hands were still moving, still talking, still returning to the world the way living things return to the light, one small, certain movement at a time. The ring was on Adese's hand. It had gotten where it was going. In the months that followed, things changed slowly, the way real things change. Not in dramatic declarations, but in accumulation, in the quiet deposit of ordinary moments that add up over time to something you can only name in retrospect. Jia began drawing again. First, just the tortoise, the one from Adese's ongoing story, which had by now acquired a name and a backstory, and a complicated relationship with a cloud who kept following it around. Then other things. The lake from a photograph she had found in her father's study. 2 women standing in autumn light. She didn't ask where the photograph came from. She drew the lake and the trees and the light on the water, and she gave one of the women yellow flowers that weren't in the photograph because she thought the woman with the warm smile would have liked yellow. Her father found the drawing on the kitchen table one morning and stood looking at it for a very long time before he picked it up carefully and took it to his study and placed it on the shelf next to the original photograph. Adeze came to know the Jang household not through any formal arrangement, but through the organic accumulation of Jia's need and her own willingness to meet it. She had Sundays off most weeks. Some Sundays, Jia called her. They would talk about the tortoise story, which had now reached a point where the tortoise had accidentally become the leader of a small country of birds and was deeply uncertain about the responsibility, and about other things, smaller things, the kind of things children talk about when they trust someone. A difficult thing that happened at school, a dream she couldn't shake, a question about what comes after dying that she couldn't ask her father because she didn't want to make him sad. Adeze answered her questions honestly, in the way of someone who does not talk down to children and does not pretend the hard things are easy. She told Jia that nobody knew for certain what came after, and that the people she loved would think that was a very unsatisfying answer, and probably would have said something wiser if they were here to say it. Jia had laughed at that, the real laugh, the one that was becoming less rare, the one that was slowly reclaiming its residency in her chest, and said that sounded right, and that her mom would have said something about the water cycle, how nothing really disappears, it just changes where it goes. Adeze had been quiet for a moment after that. Then she had said, very carefully, that Jia's mother had once said something almost exactly like that to her, in Ohio, standing on the bank of a river on a cold November morning, during a conversation about a research project that had somehow turned into a conversation about death and continuity, and whether the universe was fundamentally kind. And Jia had gone very still and then said, quietly, "Tell me." And Adeze had told her. Zhang Qianwu, who had overheard this conversation from the hallway outside Jia's room, because he was a man who kept himself informed at all times about all things, and also because he was a father, had stood outside his daughter's door and not moved for the duration of it. He had not interrupted, he had not intruded. He had stood in the hallway with his back against the wall and his hands flat at his sides, and let his daughter be given back something he had not known how to give her. Not just warmth, not just attention, but a piece of Suyeon herself, an actual memory, a witnessed moment, the specific texture of who her mother had been in a conversation with a friend, unperformed, unself-conscious, fully alive. He had not cried in the hallway. He is not a man who cries in hallways. But there was a long moment in which he was very still in a different way than his usual stillness. Not calculating, not containing, but something closer to the way the sea is still just before a wave forms, all the energy gathered inward before it moves. He had gone to his study afterward and sat at his desk for 40 minutes, doing nothing productive at all. There are things that happen in life that cannot be explained by the logic of cause and effect, that sit outside the vocabulary of probability and intention and rational choice. Things that look, from the outside, like coincidence, but which have a structure too specific to be accidental, too targeted, too precise, as though something in the arrangement of the world had been nudging pieces into position for years, waiting for the right moment and the right set of circumstances, and a small, grief-stricken girl with her mother's eyes and her mother's instincts and a ring on a chain around her neck. Zhang Hanu is not a man who believes in fate. He believes in intelligence, preparation, leverage, and patience. He believes in controlling variables. He has built a life and an empire on the premise that outcomes can be managed if you understand the inputs well enough. He is revising this position slightly. Not because he has become a soft man or a naive one, but because what happened in that hospital corridor has confronted him with a category of event that his usual frameworks cannot fully account for. A category in which an 8-year-old girl, guided by nothing but the felt pressure of grief and the scent of a soap, crossed a waiting room and found exactly the right person. In which a dead woman's ring traveled from a cold hospital locker to her daughter's neck, to her best friend's hand, and arrived, finally, where it had always been heading. In which the people you love, who are gone from the world, continue somehow to arrange things, subtly, through smell and instinct and the stubborn memories of children, continuing to love you from the country they now inhabit, finding ways across the distance, leaving things exactly where they need to be. He keeps the photograph on his shelf. The two women at the lake, laughing, autumn light on the water, neither of them knowing yet what their lives would become. He looks at it sometimes, in the evenings when the office is quiet and Gia is asleep, and the building hums with its own interior life. He looks at it and thinks about all the things Soo-yeon knew that he didn't. The things she understood about people and warmth, and the specific intelligence of the heart that cannot be run through a database or confirmed by cross-referencing. She would have laughed at him for cross-referencing, he thinks. She would have said he was doing it the long way around to something that was already obvious. He thinks she might be right. Gia is drawing again. She laughs the real laugh more and more often. She is making a picture book, she told him last week. A picture book about a tortoise who accidentally became the leader of a country of birds and had to figure out what kind of leader to be. She wants to give the first copy to a daisy. She asked her father if that was okay. He said yes. He said it the way he says things that matter, without extra words, without decoration, the way a man says something when it is simply and completely true. And Gia had nodded with the seriousness she gives to important things and gone back to drawing, her small hands moving across the page, giving shape to creatures who wanted to fly, in a world where tortoises led birds and rings found their way home, and where the people who loved you, even from very far away, kept finding ways to make sure you were not alone. The ring was on Adese's hand. It had gotten where it was going. Some things know exactly where they belong.
Hello, welcome to the Quiet Blue Stories. I believe that you enjoyed the story that you just finished watching now. If you enjoy it, I want you to like and subscribe and share this video so that you can always be updated once we upload our next video. Thank you very much. Bye bye.